Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tzadik Vov Amud Beis at the new Mishnah. The Torah tells you that when one has a carbon and he wants to then take a behema that is chulin and do a tmura, make a switch for the kedusha of the behema's carbon onto the behema's chulin, he's not allowed to do so. However, if he does do so, the behema carbon remains kadosh, and now the chulin also becomes kadosh, and it's niskadesh with the same level of kedusha as the first behema. What happens when that carbon is a carbon pesach? That's the discussion here in our Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua says, Shomati shetmura as pesach kreva, v'tmura as pesach eina kreva, ve'ein li lefarish. I heard from my rabbeim that there's a scenario when you can have a carbon pesach that you did a tmura with. You took a behemoth's chulin and switched it with a carbon pesach, which again makes that chulin into also a davar shebe kedusha. It has the kedusha of a shlomim as well. There are times when that will be able to be brought as a carbon shlomim, and there are times that will not be able to be brought as a carbon shlomim. But I don't remember, he says, what are those scenarios? Rabbi Akiva says, Ani efaresh, I will explain to you. It's based on when a person has initially a lamb designated for a carbon pesach, and then he loses that carbon pesach, but he's stuck, he needs to bring a carbon pesach. So he now designates another lamb as a carbon pesach. It's not a tmura, it's a carbon pesach. Now, what happens when he ultimately finds that original lamb that he designates as a carbon pesach? Well, it depends. When does he find it? Is it before or after the shechita of the second lamb that he designated as a carbon pesach? Says the Mishnah, Ha-pesach shenimsa koidem shchitas ha-pesach. If he finds the carbon pesach before the shchita of the second lamb that he designated, yire ad sheistaiv v'yimocher v'yavi bedam of shlomim. Then he says that he then takes that which he then designates as a carbon pesach, and he allows it to graze until it gets a mum. He sells the animal and takes the value to buy a carbon shlomim. V'chein tmurasoi. And similarly, it's tmura. That means if you took a third animal and took that animal, which was chulin, and you tried to switch the kedusha of the carbon pesach onto this animal, well, since that carbon pesach was dachui, therefore it had to go ahead and graze until it got a mum and be sold for its value. So too over here, that behemoth's chulin will have to be the same thing. And therefore that's one scenario. However, if it was after the original carbon pesach was, the original carbon pesach was found after the second lamb was shechted as a carbon pesach, then that original lamb will be shechted as a carbon shlomim. And similarly, if you had a behemas chulin that you want to switch from the shlomim onto this animal as well, so then it will have the same designation as a carbon shlomim. So that's the answer that Rabbi Akiva gives Rabbi Yehoshua. But according to our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva explains Rabbi Yehoshua based on a scenario where the original owner had a carbon pesach, he lost that carbon pesach, and he designated another carbon pesach in its place. From there, he learns out, then similarly would be v'chein tmurasoi, in a scenario when you had a third animal, which was chulin, and you then made a tmura, you made a switch to then put the kedusha onto that behemoth's chulin. So now the Gemara asks right away, v'leima pesach korev u'pesach eino korev. Why did the Mishnah not teach the scenario that Rabbi Akiva is talking about? Why is he talking about a scenario of tmura? Answers the Gemara, hakamash malan the ika tmuras ha-pesach de lo kreva. we needed the Mishnah to teach us a chiddush. Why? Because I might think to say that a shlomim that is not a carbon Pesach, therefore there's no such thing. Kamash malan, I could have a carbon Pesach that becomes a shlomim. So therefore, in the second scenario in the Mishnah, where he finds the carbon Pesach, that means that he finds the original designated lamb only after he shechs, so then the original lamb is a carbon shlomim. So that's a chiddush over here that we need to know, that even the Tmura will also be a carbon shlomim. Itmar, the Gemara brings the following statement. Rabba Omar koidem shchitu lacha shchita shaninu. Rabbi Zera Omar koidem chatzos lacha chatzos shaninu. There's a machlokes amorim. What are we talking about? Is it before or after the shchita that we're referring to here? Or is it before or after chatzos? Now we read the Mishnah, Kipshuta, that's talking about before and after the shchita, but we see there's a machlokes amorim. Maybe it means that it's before or after chatzos. So the Gemara asks, Rabbi Zera, who says before after chatzos, haktani koidem shchita as haPesach. But the Mishnah, that's why we learned the Mishnah, like the opinion of Rabbi, is because the Mishnah states before the shchita of the Pesach. That's when he found the original lamb. So why does Rabbi Zera learn differently? Says the Gemara, no, Ema koidem zman shchitas Pesach. You have to add the word zman. That the Mishnah says before the zman of the shchita Pesach. That's the kavan of the Mishnah. That's Rabbi Zera's shita. Katanoim, the Gemara, in fact, brings this as a machlekes tanoim. The same machlekes we just saw in the Amaroim, whether it's before and after the shchita or before and after the chatzos. HaPesach shenimsa koidem shchita yireh, la'achar shchita yikrav. The first opinion says that it depends on before after the shchita. If you find the behemoth, the original lamb, before the shchita, then you have to let the lamb go ahead and graze and get a mum. But if it's after the shchita, then yikrav, then bring up as a carbon. Rabbi Eliezer oimer koidem chatzos yir, like Rabbi Zera said, v'lachar chatzos yikrav. He says it depends if it's found either before chatzos or after chatzos. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah of the Sefer, Achar Shchitas HaPesach Yavi Shlomim. If he finds the original lamb after the Shchita of the Pesach, then indeed that lamb will then become a carbon Shlomim. Omar Rava said, Lo shonu elo shenimtza achar shchitas, shchita vehimir boy achar shchita. Rava explains that the Mishnah is talking about a scenario where he found the lamb after the shchita, and then he was making a tmura after the shchita. Then we're talking about over here where indeed v'chein tmuraso means that carbon that behemoth chulin becomes now also carbon shlomim. But if he found the original lamb before the shchita, even if he were make a tmura after the shchita, and say this behemoth chulin is going to then be switched with the kedusha of the behemoth, the original lamb, which was nidche, so we say tmurasa mikaya kedusha dechuya ka'asa v'lo kreva. Then we'll say that indeed, even though the tmura was done after the shchita, we'll say the tmura comes from a kedusha's dechuya, and therefore it's not kreva, it's not going to be a shlomim, but rather it would have to also graze and then get a mum and be sold, and its value will be then be used to buy a shlomim. Eisvei Abaye asks on Rava, who makes again the chiluk between when indeed he says the Mishnah is talking about that you found the original behemoth, the original lamb, and indeed you found the original lamb, and indeed you did the tmura all after the shchita. That's when you go ahead and make the original lamb a shlomim and also the tmura a shlomim. But if you found the original lamb before the shchita, even if you did the tmura after the shchita, then the behemoth chulin that made a tmura will have to graze and get a mum. Asks Abaye, Eisvei Abaye, im kesev, the pasuk says im kesev, which is L'chara is superfluous, because already talking about the kesef that's sown before. So why does it have to mention im kesef? Matam ulamar im kesef l'rabois tmuras hapesach ach hapesach shekirva shlomim. That if it comes to include a case where you did a tmura on a carbon pesach that was after ha-pesach, that you can bring that as a shlomim. The Gemara works out, what are we talking about? If you're saying it's all happened after the shchita, and we still say that tmura becomes a shlomim, then pshita, lama likro. Why do I need a pasuk for that? That's poshit. He made a tmura, he took a behemoth chulin for a behemoth shlomim, and therefore memela, that behemoth chulin became shlomim also. And therefore it could be makiv on the mizbeach. Are we now talking about where he indeed found the behema koidem the shchita, and he made the tmura after the shchita? And here we're talking about a scenario where it's different now. So the Gemara says loy, just like, in other words, that would be the kasha on Rava that Abai is asking. So even still, even if you did a tmura after the shchita and you found the behema before the shchita, still it would be a shlomim, not like what Rava said. Really, it is talking about where it all happened after the shchita. You asked me, what's the chiddush? The cross machta ba'alma. You're right, the Brisa doesn't need a chiddush, just bring the krah, the pasuk, as a support. Ella asked the Gemara, but krah lamai also. But what is the pasuk itself coming to then say? What do we need the pasuk itself for? Gemara explains, Kidditani, like it says in the Brisa, Kesev is l'rabos is a pesach la'aliyah. The word kesev in the pasuk is coming to teach me that although when it comes to carbon shlomim, normally the tail of the kesev is brought, but it doesn't speak about the proceedings of a carbon pesach. For that, the word kesev comes to include, even by a carbon pesach, we also bring the tail on the mizbeach. It's a fatty tail called the aliyah. Keshehu oimer eim kesev, when it goes on to say in kesev, that's also seems to be superfluous. It's l'rabois pesach she'over shnosai, to come to include even a pesach that goes beyond 1 year, can be brought as a carbon shlomim, because the carbon pesach is only up to 1 year old. Shv'shlomim haboim machmas pesach, and a shlomim that comes because of a pesach that we said, for example, he lost his carbon pesach, and he had to designate another carbon pesach in its place. So the kol mitzvah shlomim, it has all of the mitzvahs of a regular carbon shlomim as follows. Sheton smicha, requires smicha, that you put all your weight on the animal. V'nis Psachim, and it also calls the wine libations on the mizbeach. Utufas chazei v'shoik, and the waving of the chazei and the shoik, the parts that are waved with the kohen and the bailim, all of that is a regular shlom, would also apply here as well. And afterwards, the psukim goes on to say v'im eis. First it talks about various psukim of the kesev, then it talks about the eis. So when it says v'im eis, which l'chara is the same scenario, the same proceedings as the keves had just was spoken before, why does it have to specify v'im eis? Hifsik ha'inyan, to make a hefsek. Why? To teach something different over here. Limeid al ha'esh she'ein tuna aliyah. Although all the proceedings are the same as the kesev in the Korban Shlomim, but when it comes to the A's, the aliyah is not brought up for the Korban Pesach. Now the Gemara says this whole thing that we just taught now, that Rava said his din and Abaye asked on it, that was taught not on the seif of our Mishnah, but rather on the reish of the Mishnah when the Korban Pesach was found before the Shechita. Let's see. Ha-Pesach shenimtze koydem Shechita ha-Pesach. If what happened was he had a Korban Pesach that got lost, we'll say the lamb that got lost. Then he designated a second lamb for a Korban Pesach. So in the first scenario in the Mishnah is that he found the original lamb before he shechted the second lamb. So what's the din? Then yira achi yistayev v'yimocher The din is that he has to allow the lamb to go ahead and graze, get a mum, and then be sold, and its value be used for a carbon shlomim. Similar, if you take a behemoth chulin and you were to then make a tmura with that second lamb, so then the din is that just like that was nidche, it was a pesach that's dochui and had to then be grazing until it gets a mum, so too this tmura would also. So Omar Rava comments on this reish of the Mishnah. That's all happened before the shechita. You found the original lamb before the shechita, and you then took a behemoth chulin, a third animal, and you made a tmura with this original with this lamb. All happened before the shechita. But if you found the original lamb before the shechita, and you did the tmura after the shechita, you took your behemoth chulin, and then you said that you want this new behemoth that's chulin to be tmura in place of the original lamb. So then, just like the original lamb, he says, is going to be a shleimim, carbon shlomim. So too, then tmurasa kreva shlomim. Then also the tmura will also be shlomim. My time. What's the reason? Kikava shchita midi dachazile. Because when you're koveya, the shame Pesach, that was during the shchita. Something that's chazi. Midid loy chazi loy kava. But something that's not chazi, right? Because you didn't have it yet. So then it's not going to be considered to be something that you can be koveya the shame Pesach. So therefore, it will be able to be used as a carbon shlomim, and therefore the tmura will also be a shlomim. Abaye asks, he challenges Ravas, and he says the following: Im Kesed, the pasuk says, Ma Talmud Lomer, what's it coming to teach? L'rabois tmuras hapesach acha pesach shekrev shlomim. The Brisa says it comes to include the tmura of a carbon pesach after the pesach that was krev shlomim. We have to understand what case we're talking about. In other words, what we said is that just like the tmur of a Pesach, achar Pesach is krev mishlomim, that means that you found the carbon Pesach and it was found only after the shechita. So therefore, when you made a tmura, that itself will also then be something that's going to be shlomim. So that's the classical scenario. So Gemara says, the Brisa continues, and this is the Brisa we haven't seen until now. The Brisa continues on Tzadik Zayin Amud Aleph. Yochel, I might think, af lifnei Pesach, Kain. This might be also before the Pesach is so. In other words, you did the Tmuras HaPesach before the Pesach was Kfei V'Shlomim. Talmud Loimar, who? Therefore it says who? Who Karev ve'ein Tmuras HaPesach Kreva. He is Karev, and a type of Tmura of Pesach is also Kreva. Is not Kreva, sorry. Again, who? Who Karev? That animal, that means the original lamb is brought as a Korban Pesach, but since the Tmura was done after, then we're going to say, Ein Tmura, this type of Tmura of Pesach is not Kreva, right? That would be a kasha exactly on what Rava said, because Rava tainas over here that if you did the Tmura after the Shechita, right, even if you found the animal before the Shechita, but you did the Tmura after the Shechita, he says that it will be Kreva Shlomim. That's what Rava said. On that, Abaye challenged and see that's not so from this brisa. Who kare ve'ein tmura so hapezah kreva? That would not, this type of tmura would not be kreva as a shlomim. Hey chidami. So now the Gemara speaks out. What is the case that the brisa is talking about? Ileimo, which is like Yakash on Rava. Ileimo shenimtze kodim shchita v'him yirba kodim shchita. If you found the original lamb before the shchita and you also did the tmura before the shchita, then that's poshit. Pshita lama likra. That's poshit. That's not going to be a valid shlom. You have to let them both graze because it's nidche. Elalav shenimtze kodim shchita. Vehemer boy achar shchita. But is it not? We're talking about where you found the original lamb before the shchita and you did the tumura after the shchita. And therefore we find that over here, even still, that tumura is something that will not be karev as a shlomim. It will also have to graze and get a mum. Tiyufta, the Rava, Tiyufta, indeed, this is going to be a refutation against Rava.